When we talk about purity culture, the conversation rightfully focuses on the harm done to women and girls. But there's another side to this story that rarely gets a hearing. Boys who were told that they were ticking time bombs of lust, that their natural desires were sinful, and that their entire future happiness depended on suppressing who they were. It was a system built on control, and the result for many men is a legacy of shame, performance anxiety, and a fractured sense of self. So, how does a culture obsessed with male purity end up robbing men of their humanity? Today, I've got with me Rachel Overvoll, who is a somatic sex coach at Modern Intimacy and the author of two books, and one particularly relevant to this topic, Finding Feminism.
The fundamental structure that happens here is we really sever from any nuances of personality. We're saying you are only one thing, you are only a predator, you are only this like creature lurking in the dark, can't waiting to get a woman and to steal something from her, or take something. And that really doesn't allow for any nuances of humanity or expression. It's also paving a way for men to say, like, this is the only thing you are and this is the only thing you can be. So it doesn't offer men opportunities to be something besides a predator. It says, this is it.
Yeah, they kind of get put into these bifurcated camps of I'm either all good and I'm a hero or I'm all bad, I'm a monster. And that's really limiting in how they sort of conceptualize themselves and move in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. As humans, we're incredibly nuanced, and we have so many parts of us that are expansive and more than a binary. And that's really putting men in this specific binary, and a binary that doesn't allow them to learn how to do better or be better, too, because it absolves them of accountability. I think the biggest thing is pressure. Like it puts so much pressure on men for performance, and specifically like performance for the first time you're having sex and your wedding night, if that's the purity culture you're following. And pressure and pleasure can't coexist. If I'm feeling incredible pressure to perform, I'm probably also going to have difficulty with erection, difficulty being present in my body, difficulty with experiencing massive amounts of anxiety. I'm going to really sever myself again from pleasure because pressure is not a container in which I can also experience pleasure.
That's so true. It's sort of antithetical, right? We talk about sex as a performance, but it really isn't. It's about being embodied. And if men are taught that they have to abstain from sex and then they get this reward, the reward doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like this pressure to now replace this moment of intimacy with what might be felt in the body like a high stakes test of masculinity. Right? You've waited so long and now you have to prove that you can and that you will be this virile human. It's really, I imagine, quite flummoxing for a lot of men in those moments.
Absolutely. And that can also lead to sexual avoidance as well. If
Hmm.
it's feeling like I'm having a lot of anxiety about sex or I'm having difficulty with erection, like I'm probably going to start avoiding sex. And avoiding sex, when you grow up in a culture where intimacy is only framed as sex, you're also avoiding intimacy because there's not enough dialogue or language around sex as expansive and intimacy as one part of sex, or sex is one part of intimacy and intimacy as a big umbrella.
That is really important. Yeah, it also limits the definition of sex, which then creates more restrictiveness around how to express care and connection, which can be really limiting.
Within purity culture, women are repeatedly called the gatekeepers of sex and sexuality. And so women are also blamed for any type of, I'm going to say, like immoral or impure thoughts using purity culture language, or immoral or impure acts that purity culture would talk about. And when men are expected to be a predator, and then they come on to a woman and let's say they do something impure. Maybe that's flirting, maybe it's touching someone, maybe it's having sex, but anything in that realm of sexuality that's closed off to them, the women are blamed for being the person causing it, and then the men don't have any accountability for it. So it doesn't allow for any repair. It doesn't allow for any personal growth. It teaches men that, like, this is who I am and this is all I'm ever going to be. Instead of, maybe I did this thing and it was harmful, let me learn how to repair it and be better and change.
Yeah, so the double bind is that if I'm loyal to myself and I do something that feels like pleasure, I evoke all of this shame and I bring a bunch of shame upon myself, so I don't do those things. But then if I'm loyal to this script of purity culture, it's so deprivational. And, interestingly, deprivation can lead to a feeling of shame because it really perpetuates this experience of unworthiness, right? So I could imagine that for a lot of men who grow up in purity culture, there's both an idealization and a devaluation of sex, and both sides of that coin are cloaked in a lot of shame. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And the shame is what makes accountability so hard. Because if I have to own what I've said or done or thought or wished for, right, or fantasized about, then that makes it real. And then that reality comes with a lot of shame. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have any tools to deal with the shame because shame is taught as a good thing. So so you also don't have any, there's no learned tools on how do I cope with shame? How do I move through shame? How do I process shame? It's
Right.
something you're supposed to feel because it keeps you in line.
Yeah, but a lot of men get conditioned to externalize that shame onto the women around them. It's their fault, because if it's their fault, then it wasn't mine to own. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that creates a whole host of relationship problems later in life because if you don't get practice early, learning how to repair after you've hurt someone or said something that was disappointing or whatever it might be, then you are very brittle psychologically in your adult relationships. And it leads to dynamics that don't have a lot of movement and flexibility around things that are hurtful because there's so much fragility and brittleness around sort of the whole house of cards coming down if your partner's experience of being hurt is true.
Yeah, it doesn't allow for any vulnerability, and vulnerability is key to relational integrity. So by not having vulnerability, you also can't have relational integrity with your partner. Under purity culture, and I would argue under the branch of patriarchy in general, which
Right.
purity culture is a part of, men are only allowed to feel anger and lust and nothing else. And so if those are the only emotions I'm allowed to feel, that doesn't really give me depth of knowing myself. Because anger is like a surface level emotion, or lust, where there's a lot of things underneath. And if I'm never able to explore what's underneath, I don't really get to go to the vastness of who I am as a person, or understand my depth, or understand why I'm feeling these things, or why I'm acting out in these ways. It doesn't allow any self-intimacy. And if I don't have intimacy with myself, I can't model that or have that with other people. The first place we learn skills is to learn them with ourselves, and then we translate those into our relationships.
It's such a good point, and it reminds me of something you've talked about before, where the repression of lustful feelings often leads to a generalized numbness or an inability to connect with oneself. And I think where you're going with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that that repression requires a disembodiment, right? And when we have to disembody or dissociate, if we use different language mildly, we lose a lot of really important somatic information about how we feel. And so for a lot of men, the conditioning they've been given over the years about how to be a man has required them to evacuate their bodies, because to feel is to be feminine, and that's sort of the biggest thing they want to fight against, or are told to fight against. And over time, that requires in such a distance from themselves, such a distance in knowing themselves. And in partnership, we can really only meet someone as much as we've met ourselves.
I think in marriage, it can look like ownership of a partner's body, of demanding sex or feeling entitled to sex, or the thing I hear a lot of like, my love language is just sex. And spoiler alert, no one's love language is penetration. But so all of these ideas of like entitlement to sex, right? How does that damage your relationship with others? It's not allowing the other person to consent or to be joyful or to be pleasurable in the experience. So you're also not having sex that's connective. You're having sex that's like completely disembodied and in a lot of ways using your partner as a sock that you would masturbate into. And so you're completely cut off from the sexual experience and the transcendence that can be in sex with other people. That's how I see it show up, and the things I talked about earlier too, the erectile dysfunction or struggling with erection, anxiety, depression, all of those are symptoms I see with a lot of clients that grew up in purity culture as well. How
And
it affects
the
the
avoidance piece,
avoidance.
right? Because that shame is so big, it's so real. And even though, yes, people are often told that it's for their own good to feel that way, it doesn't feel good. So a lot of folks try to avoid shame unconsciously or consciously.
The binaries continue. I think that's the biggest piece of the fatherhood journey that I see, of the binaries of this is what men are supposed to do, this is what women are supposed to do. Men are predators, women are prey, women are gatekeepers, men aren't responsible. The binaries and not allowing your children to develop outside of that and keeping them in this very two-dimensional cage doesn't allow for full expression of your children. And a big thing too is when we're not teaching our children about sex education at appropriate ages, appropriate content at appropriate ages, children are naturally incredibly curious. They're learning about the world around them. So when they don't have conversations about sex, consent, their bodies, what it means to be in their body, they tend to act on that curiosity with other children. And that's also when we see a lot of sexual trauma happen at young ages between children, because they don't have anyone to ask these questions to. They don't have the language a lot of times. And then they also don't have any instruction or guidance on what's happening to them and why they're curious about these things, or how to explore their curiosity in a way that's beneficial for their development.
I think this is such an important thing to really hone in on, because a lot of parents, really are doing the best that they know how to do with the tools they were given, and they're not trying to set their kids up for this kind of experience. And the reality is that when people grow up in a very high control environment that shames any and everything sexual, they do have a higher likelihood of being sexually victimized by other children and also by adults, because they internalize that shame as I've done something wrong. So they're less likely to talk about what's happening to them if something untoward is happening or traumatic is happening. And it creates a lot more vulnerability than I think most parents are aware of. And when fathers in particular are trying to model for their children healthy boundaries and safety, if they're perpetuating this conversation about shame around sexuality unintentionally, they are often facilitating a naivete in their children that they don't necessarily want to instill.
Yeah, so it's putting children in unsafe situations, and it's also not allowing children to grow and develop into the nuanced human that they have the possibility to be.
So a lot of men are leaving purity culture now, and they're navigating a world with evolving and sometimes conflicting ideas about masculinity.
I think the foundation of this that's important to mention too is that I see a lot of women leaving purity culture before men, but that's because purity culture isn't beneficial to women. For men to leave purity culture, it is a really big deal because you are leaving something that is so beneficial to your ego
Yes.
and how people view you. And so it's that as you on this journey. Congratulations for doing that. And welcome to the start of Unlearning, because now there's so much more to go at and how to navigate that. I want to honor the fact that it's really confusing and that it will take time for you to understand what your own personal integrity is outside of what you've been taught. And it will take time for you to develop relational skills, like we've talked about today, vulnerability and relational integrity, because you're learning all of these things for the first time. And you're learning them in a way where you're choosing, not where someone is directing you with fear of hell behind it.
Yeah. And it can be really difficult. I mean, I've worked with many men on this journey. It can be really difficult for them to, hold space for the parts of themselves that were neglected growing up because of all of this conditioning, and also the parts of themselves that perhaps were benefiting from all of this kind of, I hate to call it ego inflating, but it sort of is ego inflating in a lot of ways. Rhetoric around purity and everything that we've talked about. It's tough to kind of balance the hubris and the humility that are necessary to unlearn a lot of this, and also to sort of hold yourself with tenderness at the same time. But for any men listening, if this is your journey, if you're going through this, it is hard and it is completely worthwhile. I don't know one man who's deconstructed this who has said, man, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. Right? There's really good stuff on the other side, and the growing pains are worth it.
Yeah, and like take your time and remember that healing also means living. It doesn't mean healing and not spending any time experiencing life. Like, I think healing can become really addicting to people leaving religion, because religion can be a drug in and of itself. And so they come out and then they kind of replace religion with this idea of healing. And now I'm going to put all my energy into this. Healing is meant for us to live life, not for us to be chained to bettering ourselves at every moment, at every day, at every time.
That's such a good point. I think a lot of folks, from a neurobiological perspective, find a lot of comfort in something that's very structured, especially when you grew up in a very high controlled environment. That structure feels grounding, but it can become a replacement for something that was dictating your life, as opposed to something that you are using as a touchstone for your own grounding and then exploring with freedom.
Yeah, and I think that that's the most like difficult part for so many people, is you're coming from this rigidity, and like you don't have to use a lot of cognition when you are experiencing rigidity, because it's either this or that, and this means hell and that means heaven. So I'm doing this or that. When you come out of that rigidity and the world is in front of you, you have to use a lot of cognition and a lot of self-inquiry to understand, what am I and who am I in this world, and how do I relate to myself and others, because it's not the binaries I've been taught, and it's not good or bad or right or wrong or yes or no. It's yes and.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like embodiment, number one, embodying and being in touch with your body and what your body's feeling, not disconnecting from your body. It looks like cultivating vulnerability and learning how to do that in a way that is integrity with yourself and your other relationships, not in a way that's exploitative of others. And it does look like taking accountability. I think that's the biggest part of, like, you have to take accountability for the things that you've done previously that might have been harmful to people, to your partner or to people in your community, and use that going forward. The accountability is, I think, some of the hardest pieces of this, because for all of us, it comes up against our ego.
Totally.
It's hard to say sorry. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to say sorry sometimes, and to recognize what you did and how it impacted other people. But the accountability is the key cornerstone, because without that, you're not really learning how to become a new person or a more contributing member to your relationship or society. The accountability is what helps us grow. Without accountability, we're not growing.
Accountability creates safety, right?
Yeah.
Because accountability communicates to someone, I can honor your reality, even if I don't like what it says about me in this moment. Even if I don't agree with what it says about me in this moment, I can honor your reality and the impact that I had on you, even if it wasn't my intention to do so. And that is where repair really starts, is in validating someone else's experience and owning your contribution to it. right? That old saying, it's impact over intention. Yes. Close to people comes with hurting them. And I say that not in a flippant way, giving people full range to hurt each other intentionally, but the more you care about someone, the more high stakes that relationship is, the more vulnerable you are by definition, right? We can't be close without that vulnerability. So, vulnerability is literally the conduit to healthy intimacy, and that requires safety. So, accountability helps all of that take shape in a way that creates safety. And it creates an environment where people can make mistakes and there can be recovery and repair from them. And that's actually where a lot of the repair and the integrity building is actually being able to say, okay, I hurt you. That sucks. I'm sorry. I will make it better in the future. Right? And paradoxically, the hardest thing sometimes for us is the thing that creates so much movement to the person that we've hurt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate you having this conversation. And folks, if you're still listening, thank you so much. If you like this content, you find it valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what you think in the comments below.